Muy buenos días para todos
Good morning for everybody.
y para todos. La verdad,
For everybody,
para la campaña
for
latinoamericana
the Latin American campaign for the right for education, CADE,
es primero
is first of
mm,
all
un, un, eh, un gusto siempre
a very nice
ir
occasion
de la mano con la
to
campaña
go
mundial por la
together with the World
educación y
Campaign for
esta Semana de Acción
Education,
Mundial
work
por
of
la
World
Educación.
Action for Education.
Para quienes no lo
So
sepan,
for
año tras
those
año
that do not know,
llevamos
every year
adelante este
we
esfuerzo
carry out this
global
effort, this global effort
desde el movimiento por el derecho
of
humano a
the
la
movement
educación.
for the right for
Y
education.
este año tenemos un
And this
particular
year, we have a
énfasis que
particular
de
emphasis that
Grant
Grant will tell
seguramente
you when
cuando
he
hablará
takes
desde
the floor.
clave.
From Clade,
Como probablemente muchos
as
de ustedes
probably
saben,
many of
el
you know,
tema de la
the theme of
privatización
privatization
en la
in
educación, el tema
education,
de
the
lucro,
theme of
el tema de
the
lucro
business in education,
incluso
the
rostros a veces
different
no tan evidentes
faces, many times not so
las
evident,
fuerzas
which the forces,
privadas de las
the
empresas, de
private
las
forces of the
corporaciones,
corporations
inciden y marcan
have an
nuestras
emphasis and
políticas educativas.
define
Ha
the
sido siempre una
educational
preocupación.
policies has been always a
El día de hoy
preoccupation.
vamos a
Today,
compartir
we will share with
en
you
el marco de la
in
Semana
the
Mundial
frame
por la
of this week,
Educación
World Week for
cuatro
Education, four
publicaciones
presentations,
recientes
very
de
new ones,
distinta
of different
naturaleza,
nature
envergadura y con distinto
and
objetivo
different
también,
object
pero todas
also,
ellas
but all
de
of
uno o
them
de otro
in one way or
vinculadas
another are linked
a esta
to this
agenda de claves
agenda,
en
climate
busca de la educación
agenda for
superior.
the
Y por
fight for
hoy
the public
vemos la
education and
importancia
for the
de
importance
poner
of
límites
putting some limits
al avance
to the advancement
privatizadora
of the private privatization
en nuestro
forces in
sistema
our
y el
public
consolidamiento
systems and the
del
weakening
modo
of these
educativo.
systems of
Así
education.
que desde clave,
So from Claudia, you are very much welcome.
tenerlos aquí con
It's
nosotros.
very nice to have you here.
Van a disfrutar muchísimo esta
You
sesión.
will enjoy this
Que
session.
lo sepan de antemano.
I want you to know it
Los temas que se van a presentar son
because the four
verdaderamente
studies
muy
that will be
las
presented are
personas
very
que han
interesting and the
trabajado en ellos
professionals that
son
accompany
de
us
primera línea.
are of
Gracias.
first line. So
Vamos
thank
a
you so
también
much,
poner aquí
Delfine,
sobre la mesa a
Andresa,
María
and Maria,
y a Teresa Adriao
and
para ellos
Teresa, because they have
comentar
accepted our
los
invitation to
temas que se
comment
van a
these
presentar el día
studies
de
that
hoy.
will be
Voy
presented
a
now.
darle la palabra a
So I
Grant.
give the floor to Grant.
Grant es
Grant is
nuestro coordinador
our
general de la
coordinator,
campaña
general
mundial por la
coordinator of the World
educación
Campaign for
de la
Education,
región
and it's
latinoamericana.
always
Qué
for this
gusto contar con su
region
presencia
a
en nuestra
pleasure to have
celebración.
him
Grant,
in our events.
tienes la
So
palabra.
Grant, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Nancy, and good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone. It is always exciting, to be part of the CLADE regional event. We're always excited, and I always look forward, to engaging and discussing any issues with, CLADE as an institution, but also as members of CLADE and GCE. Again, congratulations for setting up this meeting and for taking part in this year's Global Action Week. Global Action Week is one of the key flagships of the GCE movement. This is the time that we bring together all civil society within GCE, but also beyond, to all focus on one cause and one issue on education. And this year, education, as you all know, cannot go beyond education financing, which is key to everything else. If we really want to strengthen public education systems, if we really want to really counter, what is happening, with the pandemic, the health issues, we have to call for governments to provide enough resources in education. I know that, there are a lot of debates in terms of what are the key priorities that governments are supposed to focus on. But one of those is education. Education can be a solution, to the pandemic itself. An educated community is a healthy community. We have all seen that. And I think, it is more important for governments to put resources available, so that, our children and those, in our communities can actually go and attain their education. There is no substitute to education. There is nothing else that we can substitute education with. We have to ensure that, we are pushing for the right agenda that is pushing for more funding to be available to education. And for those that are saying that, governments that are saying that, we have put a lot of money into health and all of that, and we cannot, what we are asking them is to say, what you promised before, that should remain. So at least you need to ring-fence, you need to protect that budget for education. So Global Action Week for this year, it is more focusing on pushing governments to allocate enough resources to education, and also to protect, those budgets, so that they are not pulled out into other priority areas that, they might have. I always give an example of myself. I went through public education systems. My parents never sent me to a private school. So I understand, the issues that, children go through in public education systems. And it is very important for us as a movement to really focus on that. The pandemic itself has also put pressure on public education systems because, people have lost their livelihoods. They've lost their jobs, meaning that the only place where, they can send their children is in public education systems, not in private anymore. So us, standing up and calling for more financing into education, into public education systems, we are actually providing for everyone. This is a place that, every child, regardless of their background, are able to attain education from. So it is a very important call. It is a very important process that, we as a GCE movement should actually push for. And we are really excited to see what is happening, around all the regions within GCE. There was a meeting that was organized by ASBE, and there was a meeting that also was also organized by ASEA, focusing much on cancellation of debt, because we know that, countries are paying a lot more than they should, to as debt servicing. There's a lot of money that is going out, and we are calling to say those resources must be plowed back and they must go into education. We are also excited to see that, CLADE focus is on private, the impact of private education to the whole education systems. Private education in its natural sense, it marginalizes. It is only those that can afford that are able to attain education. We do not stand for that. As GCE, we are saying that, education is a human basic right, and every person must be able, every child, every human citizen must be able to attain that, must be able to access that. I always give this example that, if there is no water in a particular community, people do not look to private actors to provide that water. They normally call for the government to do that. The same way with education. We cannot put education into private hands. We need to put, it is the obligation of the state to provide education, just as they provide security, just as they provide water, just like they provide health. It is the same issue. We need to push our governments to begin to put education as one of the top priorities. As others have said, that, there is no SDGs if SDG 4 is not prioritized. We have to ensure that, there is more resources to that, because once we do that, most of the issues that, we are grappling with in the current globalized world, they will not be there. We have to ensure that, we are holding our governments to account to the resources that are there. One role, we as civil society, I think in most cases, we debate and speak to each other. But I feel time has come for us to begin to mobilize the citizens. We need to help the citizens to understand what is their right so that they can claim it. Remember that it is the citizens that stood up in lines to vote for these governments that are in place now. If we give them the power back, if we orient them, if we inform them of their rights, they are able to call these governments to account. Civil society is just a small group, but we need to depend on the citizens for them to be able to do the work that we are doing. We must join hands with them so that then our governments can be held accountable and our governments can put more resources into education, because without education, there's no hope. Without education, there's no future. There's no country that can say we have got a future, but yet they are not providing enough resources. Lastly, we also have to look at where is money going. Yes, governments are saying that they do not have enough resources. But when you look into the budget, you see this line, debt servicing. There's a lot of money that is going outside the country in form of repaying debts. We have to begin to ask the government to look into this, because this is also an important area where government can make savings. Lastly is taxes. We have to push our government to look into the tax regimes or guidelines or regulations that they have, because a lot of money is being lost through tax evasion and erosion. We have to ensure that governments are able to look into all these areas so that then enough resources are made available to education. There is no way for government to run away and say there are no resources. No, there are resources. And we as civil society, we must stand up and say, here they are. And number one, they need to address the tax issue. Number two, they need to address the issue around debt servicing. Number three, they need to address the issue of corruption, that when money are put into education, those funds must truly be used into education. As GCE, we will soon be launching a budget tracking process. This is a tool where national coalitions will be inputting data and they'll be tracking how governments are spending on that. This will be one of the areas where we are saying the focus of this year must be on education financing, because that's what we need. So let me stop there and I'll hand over back to Nancy. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you, Grant. Thank you very much. Tenemos, este encuentro ha sido
This
organizado
encounter has been organized
por la
by
Campaña Mundial por la Educación,
CLADE,
la CLADE y la RELAPE.
the World Campaign for Education, and also
Que
RELAPE.
tenemos a Teresa
So,
Adriao, la querida Teresa
Teresa,
Adriao, en unas
Teresa,
breves palabras de apertura del evento. Y te
few words
dejo la
for
palabra,
the
Teresa,
opening
para
of
que
this
inicies
event.
con el primer
So
bloque
for you,
de
Teresa,
presentación.
you can start with the presentations.
Teresa.
Hola.
Hola, Teresa. Te dejo
Hi.
para el saludo y para que inicies ya
Can
con
you have the floor, Teresa, please.
Okay, te escuchamos.
We hear you.
Mais uma vez, eu agradeço profundamente essa oportunidade.
I thank you this opportunity and this dialogue with CLADE,
Amigos, amigas, enfim, queridas.
my dear friends.
Eu sou Teresa Adrião.
I am Teresa Adriana. I am a professor, a teacher, and I integrate a group of researchers on education, and I work in a voluntary way and in research in Latin America And we have as a focus the preoccupation and the discussion of the processes of education in our region, the global south, the education as a human right is a condition for education. In the chat, I will put a link for Alape with for more information. And I will call the participants of this first panel, and they have support directly through CLADE. And I thank CLADE because this is very important for the proximity during this day. I will moderate the first session. And for that session, I will invite Erika Martinez, Erika Doctora, and the people of the that will present some researchers just done, very new. They are the responsibles for them, and the moderation will be done and the dialogue of the result of this research, of this document, of the integration of CLADE. I will invite Maria Romero from the committee from CLADE, integrating this conversation and this in education and human rights. So please, you are very much welcome to this dialogue. Let's have a great opportunity of a debate, and internet is here for the chat. So I invite you for our presentation. Let's start. Good morning, Erika, Erika Martins. Good morning, Teresa. Okay, here I am. Here you can see me. Now I see you. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's very nice to share with you this morning with people that I love so much. And it has been a long time I didn't see you. I did not see you. I will start because I have very little time. In order to present the results of the studies of the World Bank and of the Right for Education, these studies, as Nelsie said and Teresa mentioned, integrate a series of initiatives of CLADE in order to know the different expressions in Latin America and the Caribbean to intent of occupying the political action and the fight for the public education and democratic education. I will try to share with you my screen with you. I hope that you are able to see it. So from now, I thank the cooperation of CLADE, my Giovanna Mode and Nelsie, Camila Cross also, with whom I started the dialogue, and of course, all the partners of this study, Oxfam, and also the opportunity to share with you in this week for World Week for Education and the comments I received. We know that the World Bank and the International World Fund are involved in big orientation, economical, political, and social orientations, and not only funding, but influencing the policies at the global level. So it's impossible to understand educational policy at a global, regional, and national level, and to speak about neoliberalism or privatization movements and private participation without considering the role of these multilateral organizations, and in particular the World Bank. But what are they financing and which are their agencies and directives to where they want to bring public education in Latin America and the Caribbean? We have several and needed studies in relation with these organizations in education. The map and the systematization, the analysis of all these actors must be reviewed and checked periodically, often, so that we can see the policies of interaction that they give to the educational policies. This is an objective of this study. So we present the agenda, the World Bank and read updated chart showing the principles and directives that orient their projects. We stopped in the projects financed by the World Bank and BID and actives in Latin America and Caribbean. So the ones that are being implemented in this moment, the projects is very much present, current. The study of the World Bank finished a few months before the pandemic started. In that moment, 302 active projects in Latin America and Caribbean. 48 have to do with education, and 10 are projects selected in technical cooperation in education. For BID, we saw the present agenda of cooperation and deepening at a regional level. That means that from 148 projects in education, 118 were selected as a regional one. The, for these projects is more than 4,000 million for BID and more than 6,000 million for the World Bank, an amount that allows them to have incidence in all the educational policy in our country. So here we have the list of countries and you can see them. So the budget and the recuperation of technical and financial education are for these themes. And these organizations shape the governments, shape the projects according to their different conditions that they place, with all the contradictions that they have with the government. They alter or restrict the way the bank, in the moment in which they approve the project. The World Bank and BID share policies that influence this money for education. Here are these principles. For instance, the policies based in evidences for the World Bank and BID, that the evidences control is a verification of reality, but they produce this evidence, the quantification. The more they quantificate is better for this bank. The meritocracy, they must award the best one, the competence. They believe on the invisible hand, the incentives of market, rewarding the markets, and privatization. Obviously, privatization for them is better. So this started some time ago, and it's present and it's a reality in all these projects, of which I want to comment a little bit. Yeah, for accomplishing some versions of these principles, it is an obligation to accomplish is an obligation in order to have access to these loans. These are the points that concretize inside the countries, and the BID and the World Bank are each time more similar in their form of operation. They recognize some difference among them two, among the two. I comment very fast that the World Bank start from an analysis that is more prescriptive in its proposals of loans, and it is not strange that they do not know the country, the politics, the bureaucracy, or the specific sector with which they negotiate. Indeed, the style is quite different. It's a bank created for Latin America and the Caribbean. So it knows the language, is near to the countries and the institutions and functions. Some people that work in the governments now work at BID. So the same actors work now in the BID and then in the government. Names that shift from one side to the other one in the same policies of the countries. In this sense, the people of the World Bank is a global agent where poverty and the difficulty of the human capital is a world resource. And for the World Bank, education is in a crisis of learning of different dimensions. It has several causes like poverty, the lack of abilities of the teachers, the lack of resources, bad governance, and also systemic causes that are technical and political inside each country. The strategy that they have is to consolidate their learning as a guide for the educational sector, and in some way they replace the emphasis on the quality of education. That is more explained in different documents. The agenda of BID, as I commented, is a different agenda for per countries, and also the agenda of the regional projects are two kinds of financing. The preoccupation, the central preoccupation of these policies of education is diminish inequality and poverty, and have give a push to innovation and economies, and without trying to review the main causes of such problems. There is no such reflection. In the different countries, we observe that the projects financed in the country is that we observe that they reflect the different themes. The themes receive more investment by BID have to do with basically with the access to education, with coverage, infrastructure, a focus on basic education, then they go to high school. But together with equity, they try to guarantee minimum standards of development. In relation with the regional agenda, it has more than one country, so they receive investment promoting technology in education, and also in transversal education. The main principles are related with the employment and poverty, without discussing the roots of these problems in our region. Very fastly, I will comment the findings. When we observe the content of the projects financed for the Latin American region, we have several proposals that give continuity to the traditional support of the banks for incentives to the communities. Yeah. But on another hand, they have some novelties for the educational crisis. The projects that they finance, these new models in education, have as a base models that are from outside of the region, like the South Korean ones, studies and proposals based on the model of South Korea. Some other projects have to do with the placement of the school as places very important for. Sorry?
Ok, sigo.
Sorry. In the same time, the, the, the pedagogical model in, in line. Many projects have to do with learning, with work. Sorry, there is a noise. And we see the financing of several projects that use the evidence in order to push some educational policies and justify the directives from the banks. The evidences are based on the policies. As final lines, because I think I have 1 minute more, these studies can show how to change the privatization of education conceived as an ample way of controlling the education from the part of private entities that are not democratic. Privatization of education can take many forms as alliances private, but also the pandemic and the tragedies as a stimuli can help to produce and use technologies in education, but also becoming more complex, replacing the formation of the youth from the schools until the certifications online. These initiatives are financed and negotiated by the banks and inspire questions from the role of the state and the society in the building of education, in the construction of education. This presentation is an invitation for all of you to take a view to these studies and get to know more what are the projects that this bank finance in our region, and also to sustain that the education must be democratic and include the rights and initiatives showing the role of these organisms in education in Latin America and Caribbean through the projects that now are being financed currently, and they show the fight for the right for education as all of us fight. Thank you very much.
Gracias, Érica.
Thank you, Erika.
Sua apresentação, respeito
Your
ao tempo.
presentation and the technical aspect is very nice. Now we go to Maria Rom.
Mais uma
Other
vez,
comments, please, Maria.
solicito, convido as pessoas que quiserem encaminhar,
I invite the
façam
people
pelo chat.
to put their comments in the chat also. Thank you so much for giving me the word, the floor. I want to um, I want to thank this invitation and these studies, which are so important in its analysis and its expression. I want to reflect in 5 minutes, very fast, but not so fast so that people can interpret in the different languages and with the sign language. I want to say as a first place that the bank, the World Bank and the BID are not just banks, they are political actors, as Erika mentioned, and they have a big weight as influencers of our countries. It's very curious that when you have a problem, if your son, your daughter has a problem, you do not go to the bank, but the countries go to the banks to ask for help if they want the money for certain projects. Also, I want to say that the conditioning of these banks, these loans, guarantees, and donations are conditions that the countries that give the money, the countries that give the money do not follow. It's a paternalism that they do not follow. So it is a sort of neo-colonization. because they do not follow their own counsel. So it's very curious. We can suspect from them. And in spite of mentioning that they have started from the developing in the 60s to this neoliberalism from the consensus of Washington in the 90s, it seems to be some changes, but they are not because neoliberalism is there and shows itself in all the political policies and the technical cooperation that they give, and the conditions always are with an ideological frame. So in spite of having this evidence, as Erika was saying, they look for the evidence in order to argue for their ideology. I want to say that they are not representative. It's not like United Nations. They are not representative in terms of population, in terms of countries. It's only in terms of the capital that they put. So which are the ones that have more strength? The United States and other countries that donate and that utilize the bank in order to influence and to follow, to make us follow their reforms. What is very curious, because if we look at the money that these banks give to these countries in terms of educational expenses is minimum regarding the influence they have in our educational policies. So the countries in some ways are accepting all these conditionings in spite of this so small percentage, something that as social society we should remember our countries, because this breaks the social contract among the government and the citizens. Because for these conditions, at the end, we agree with the banks, with this international organization, and not with the people that are the citizens in the different countries. So I want to show this neoliberal ideology that sees as the state not as guarantee of rights, but rather as a force that supports the market, and the market will be the one that in one way or another offers the education. So education will not be a right in this sense, but a merchandise that is bought and sell, and the offer of education is there. So I'm seeing they're quite different to the right. It's an opposed conception, because the right obliges you to protect and to accomplish. It's the right for education. And the state has the responsibility to offer a public education, but the market is different. The market says how much you can allow yourself and what do you can allow according to your economical position. Another thing that I want to say is that this neoliberal agenda that the World Bank and the BID and the World Fund, International World Fund follow, uh, this austerity or this fiscal consolidation, they just say that they have to stop the expenses in public services, that they have to put some limits, and these, the problems, then they say is that according to the abilities of the teachers, so they take the necessary abilities to give a free public education of quality, but then the guilt is of others, and the solution they offer is more privatization, more merchandise, market solutions. And as a social society, we have to fight against this privatization, against this ideology neoliberal ideology and against all these policies that are erasing a very good education and the right for education. Thank you, Erika, and thank you, Claire.
Obrigada, Maria, pelos comentários.
Thank you, Maria, for your comments.
Não observei o encaminhamento de nenhuma questão.
I continue with the questions. People is putting some comments in the chat. So, and they compliment Erika because it's very good presentation. In the site of Frade, you will find this study, and I want to say a brief comment and continue with the participation for everybody, and I thank the presence of all of you and the publications here in the chat. I put the link to the publication that Erika presented. Something very important is the presentation of a document which I want to open a bit, that has to do with the production of counter evidence. Wouldn't that be something important for the debate and for the fight against this logic, to review some strategies of the implementation of these policies? I think that you affirm with a very clear way the vicious circle that is created with all these programs that simulate policies. Wouldn't it be important to put in our agenda of facing the construction of contra evidence? As a second element would be to reinforce the role and the policies of fiscal adjustment, as Maria presented, aiding and deepening this process of privatization with the presence of the state and playing a role in education for the poorest countries, affect the international agents. I thank so much this opportunity to see Erika and her study.
Posso? Cortou pouquinho para mim? Posso?
It has cut a bit. Yes, I would take the floor. Thank you so much.
Sim, eu
Yes,
concordo contigo.
I agree with you.
É interessante, é mais convite.
Interesting, it's more an invitation so that you could have access to the document, because when we speak that the work is the production of evidence, is that they finance projects in order to produce evidences. And the most curious thing is that in other projects, they use these evidences that they finance in order to be produced. So it's something hermetic, is the evidence is produced by them, used by them, and they include platforms of data, statistics also included there. So they show the frame the problem, and they present the solution. They frame the problem with data that they produce themselves, and they present the solution according to the data produced by them. There are no democratic forms like UNESCO, no, it's something very hermetic. It's very close. Now I ask you, in order to counter or for counter evidences, who does that? The government do not does that. They are researchers of a very big resource, not only quality, very important. We have to do there, you should do there a net, a lot of researchers of different qualities, different qualifications in order to counteract this movement. Maria commented that they contribute with the minimum and ask for the maximum. I can comment that we have to remember that they are political actors from the bank. They do not give, they give loans. We pay for them to say what we have to do and how we have to do, and they give us a loan that we have to return. Some are non-reimbursables, but the countries have to give the money back with interest. So yes, they invest the minimum and oblige us to do the maximum according to the policies that they define. Thank you so much. I don't know if it is my turn or somebody else.
Creo que estamos con el tiempo, Teresa, y vamos al siguiente bloque, ¿te parece? Y
We'll
más bien,
go to the next table. If we have some little time at the end, we'll say it, yeah?
ah, perfecto, muy bien. Teresa, te dejo para que le des el pase a Andrés.
Teresa, please give the floor to Teresa. Continuing to this important agenda, I pass the function of moderator to Alessa Fernando. We have done several fights together here in Brazil.
Olá,
Hello,
não estou conseguindo abrir a minha câmera.
I cannot open my camera. I cannot
Obrigada,
open my
Teresa.
camera.
Agradeço muito
Thank you,
a
Teresa.
participação. É uma honra
Thank you,
estar
Teresa.
aqui, junto com você.
I thank you
Também
so
com
much.
todas
I'm
as
happy to be with all of you, with all these
incríveis
women that are
são
researchers,
referências tanto na
that
área
are my
acadêmica quanto na
references
área
in
de
academic
nossos
field,
lutas e ativismo
as well as our fights as activists
nesse
for the right
momento
for
da Semana de
education,
Ação Mundial,
especially
é um momento
in this moment that is the
crucial
World
para todas as
Week
coalizões que integram
for
a campanha
World
latino-americana de
Education and
educação e também as
integrates the
organizações
Latin American
que
and
reúnem e mobilizam
fight for
milhões
education and
de pessoas todos os
mobilizes
dias
millions of
para
people
defesa da
every
educação
every
pública
year to
de
defend
qualidade.
the public
Que nos une.
free education of
Então,
quality.
uma
So
alegria estar aqui com
I
vocês
am
hoje
very
e
happy
poder
to be
apresentar
here and to present
essas
also
pesquisadoras
the
e também a nossa
researchers
comentadora
and
do segundo
our
bloco,
commented of
que
this
vai
second
trazer
block
ainda
that
mais
will
dados e informações
make
sobre
some
temas importantes, né? Então,
informations
serão
very
dois estudos,
important to study.
privatização
One regarding the privatization and education in Latin America and the Caribbean, the pandemic times. Teresa Tega coordinated this and Valeria Carizon. Sorry if I am speaking in Portuguese. We are here in several languages. The synopsis of this document here that we will present, the synthesis of it, is a document that analyzes the situation in the context of education during the pandemic of COVID-19 with the tendencies of privatization and marketing of this education, and with comments for the future, considering the alerts for the privatization of educational policies. A second study will be presented regarding the increase, the finance, the business in education, from the University of São Paulo, and also by Teresa that was in the previous, Teresa Adriao, that is also expert in privatization in education, and they will, they have collaborated, they are collaborated with study, and this study will be presented to Teresa. It's a study of investigation that will show the way in which this juridical frame in the region allows the business in education. And this study includes 9 countries of Latin America. All the ones she's quoting. And she will start by the human rights and the economical interests that have a perspective that was debated very much in the first block here uh, in our life. And finally, the commentaries will be also Delfine Dor, that belongs to the right of education and regarding the privatization of human rights in church, of which we form part in Latin America. So we pass first the floor to Teresa, that we have some minutes to present this first block. Teresa en Campo Favore, please, Teresa. Thank you. Good morning. We thank this valuable opportunity. We sent one of the 4 reports that CLADE promoted in relation with the privatization of education, and is part of the World Campaign for Education with a campaign of a billion voices. We'll start by saying that since the beginning of the pandemic, the responses from the educational system started with the presence of providers of technologies for education and the organizations that support them, that have formed several nets, giving protagonism to their products and give enthusiasm to all the communities to use them. This shows new types of collaboration and nets, critical nets that have to do with the expansion of technologies of education. Thus, the importance of the private sector in the providing of educational system. Naomi claims to saying that education, the pandemic has produced a strong problem and bring us to the worst scenario, the world tragedy that the pandemic occupies the focus, but at the back there are many people that make business from this crisis and multiply their incomes, or claim this is a form in which the private enterprises search to benefit from the crisis. This shock is the political strategy that uses this crisis in order to deepen the inequalities, enrich the elite, and weakens all the rest, with this show that is dealing with the crisis. The private sector brings many solutions by coding in order to solve public problems. And the Latin American countries and from the Caribbean are a huge market for all these companies, national and multinational, and for that, the pressures to liberate the economy in this is done internationally in order to liberate the free market of the educational system. So we cannot deny that the privatization tendency previous to the pandemic are diverse, but they come from structural processes that affect the role of the state until different strategies, and the pandemic has bring the confinement, forcing the way of learning and teaching from distance. So this has bring the technologies into a fundamental component in education, giving the private sector its central place. In the work we are doing, we review 23 sites from the ministers of education of the region, looking at the space that they give to teachings in the context of pandemic, in order to know the strategies they use and also to see the alliances that they establish with foundations, NGOs, and enterprises. The results show us that 21% of the countries that we review develop platforms of learning. That is, they generate interactive services online in order to give the teachers and the students and the parents the information, tools, and resources and a virtual space to give the lessons. All the rest was giving responses from digital tools like documents, games, etc., to complement the teaching task. These resources do not have a specific space for the teachers. In 56% of the cases, there are spaces for Alphabet King, Google, Google Classroom, Microsoft, and 91% of the site, there are spaces that link directly these to TV channels and private radios as radios. 70% of the 17% of the pages have foundations, NGOs, and enterprises from country to country. In the platforms, 80% of the content is public. That means that is content generated by the educational ministry, 15% is public and private, and only 5% is just private, where the access even to certain documents and programs have to be paid. The digital resources in a 36% are PDF, 10% games, and the rest 20% are virtual libraries, document on HTML and webinars, EPUBs, audios, and 23 countries analyzed, 13 give a platform, a particular platform, provide. 55% does it through YouTube or through Microsoft, or 11% Teams, 6% Google Classroom, and 6% to Android applications. And the results show us the path to virtuality and favoring the selling of these services from the part of enterprises that adapt faster to this situation. It favor also other enterprises that were not only educational, but offer tools that were very needed in the education field. Given to the pandemic, we had to elaborate very fast TV programs and capacitation programs, programs for children, and society asked for the, responses from the states, and find the state without a preparation in terms of formation of the personal infrastructure and media. This phenomenon is part of a process of weakening of the public because of lack of resources for education. The states are not investing in research and in technological production, so the investment and the development of technological tools is in hands of private instances. Not being prepared to virtuality, they generated alliances with big companies. For Magnani, the techno enterprises grow at the rhythm of the activities that are developed in their platforms. In Team Group, in the platforms multiplied in many areas, where even there was resistance as education. In order to grow, this corporation acquire means of communication, transport enterprises, and many other services. The big corporations, the big tech corporations, multinational, have seen growing their products in a very high rate due to their capacity to provide solutions internationally in a very fast way and without cost, including the educational system. That's why, supported by multilateral enterprises and governmental statements, have integrated students, teachers, and schools in their platforms online, and augmenting the possibilities that these institutions, public public educational institutions depend on the private infrastructure. That is why, aside from earning millions, they are getting millions of possible clients towards the private sector. That is why the civil society can create several alerts. The first one, spirituality as a new reality. Because we have to have digital sovereignty and demand connectivity for everybody. The second, denaturalize the attribute, the positive attributes of the strategy of digitalization. The third, create consciousness in population on what has to do with this digitalization. And the fourth, an active society that will survey the agreements. In spite of all the negative panorama of pandemia, this has stimulated positively many reflections and debates regarding the urgency in which we are doing education. Question, the practicality is something that we have to push as states and as teachers, as children and students. Also to invite, recognize that there is a low rhythm from the state, and it has to create platforms, open code spaces, generation of education and formative proposal, among other alternatives. This world situation cannot be sustained anymore, evidently. It should generate teaching platforms, but also push a real revolution in education. This is all. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Teresa. Obrigada, Teresa. Muitas reflexões
Thank you,
importantes
Teresa.
que tocam aos nossos países da
Very
região de diversas
interesting.
formas, mas com
Very, very important
reflexões,
reflections, Teresa.
E destaco também
And I underline the debate
multilateralismo e
of
como
the multilateralism
de poder
and the agendas of power, the privatization process. That was one of the themes that accompanied this week and last week, the week of world action. At the end of the debate, I will show the thesis of Garcia with 10 minutes for the second study that we have launched today. Tessie, please. Hello. I want to thank, and very fast because I have very little time, I want to thank Vlade for this opportunity. We are adding ourselves to an enormous effort and for the opportunity to vote and to work, Teresa, Giovanna, and all the people with whom we have worked for this study. I say hello to everybody, and I mention that with a lot of pain and suffering, we here in Brazil, we are the center of the health crisis because we do not have a good public health system, because we are in a political crisis in our country. because at the end of this week we will arrive to 400,000 deaf people, and we are in a very, very strong health crisis. In this context, I participated of this event, and it's more relevant indeed to participate in order to see if we can be in the fight for education. I will try to share the screen for you and show you this screen with the study.
Eu espero que esteja em
I
tela.
hope that you are seeing it.
Está correto?
Is correct? Is it correct? Do you see it?
Obrigada.
Thank
Eu
you.
inicio, na verdade, é uma apresentação muito rápida do
The
estudo
presentation is
das
very
marcos
fast
legais da
of a
América
study
Latina.
that we did in America Latina and the Caribbean,
Eu espero seja
Latin
capaz de
America.
provocar a todos e todas,
It's the business in
a
education,
leitura.
and
O estudo tem
it's
todo
a
o trabalho de
study
divulgação
of the
e do
work
material
of.
belíssimamente bem produzido pela campanha, com
It's
apoio da
very
organização.
beautiful, produced by
Iniciamos.
the
Ele está
campaign.
organizando, além da sua
We start
apresentação,
with the
um marco teórico,
presentation,
metodológico,
with the
atividades
theoretical
lucrativas da
framework
missão,
and all the themes that were touched in this study, with the recommendations for CLADE also from the results we obtained. And here, starting from the preoccupations of CLADE, we coincide with the regions of Latin America and the Caribbean and looking for giving a word that is the study, the initiative, the incentives that allow to have this, to do business in education. In many, many countries, and Paraguay and Peru also, some references and compensations. In this aspect, we take the possibility of the patrimony, and we consider the conditions, the legal conditions of profit, the aumento of profit from the public money and from the national legislations. In this study, we consider how much these legislations have made it possible that the public funds will be transferred directly or indirectly to the private sector. And we know, all of us, that this expands in this realization in education at a global scale. So, in 19 countries, we have seen that we have categorized all these policies which are permissive for profit. And we saw the primary in the documents, the, the national constitutions, the general law for education, complementary laws, and we saw specifically the public financing and the private financing of education. And we observe what happening with the legislation as a common effort and but also we did some interviews related to this. These data were confronted with experts, with people specialized from different countries. We went to the specialists and we presented these a whole of documents, and these people were able to not only value and see the pertinence and present the new perspective and recommendation. From the point of theoretical point of view and permissivity and in relation with profit, the basic reference was the comprehension of the process of privatization of education and the possibility of the profit considered as a dimension of the privatization as a fundamental reference in Brazil and in another moment also in other places, encountered in a systematic way. And, and in this sense, we concentrated in an effort in each one of the dimensions and forms able to generate profit. Dimensions like the educational offer, like scholarships, courses, and even in which way finance to the private sector subsides and incentivation to the election from the parents to choose their schools that are financed with public funds and scholarships. The second dimension that we consider was the management of the public education, and we saw two perspectives that could be considered: the transference of the management to organizations with profit objectives, and the transference of nets of educational system. And this can be considered in a very evident way and in a very clear way that Teresa will present. She has arrived to a big finding in these relations that are started from Zoom, from relations non-presentials online from the public power to the other with the technologies of the public sector that in education put as inputs for education in the private sector, and in many countries they have called in Brazil also for the sector. And here is just one example. This is a summary that crosses a hierarchy of regulation of the profit in education with dimensions and forms of privatization for each of the countries. You have all the countries here that can be summarized in this way, obviously in a way is simple. And some of the findings, 4 countries present national constitutions that underline the free for the parents to choose the education of their children as a human right, and in which the education has the state as warranty. These are the schools of parents and in Chile, in Honduras, Peru, and Paraguay. In relation with the degree of permittivity of the profit, explicitly it's possible to transfer from the public funds to the private sector in the case of Chile, Honduras, Haiti, and Paraguay. In the case of Haiti, it's an example very special because the Constitution made it explicit that it's a role of the state to finance private education.
da Argentina, Brasil,
In Argentina,
Colômbia,
Brazil, Colombia,
e
Mexico,
Peru.
and Peru, the law is permissive,
Dado importante, nós não
inductive.
conseguimos localizar nesse
We
conjunto de 9 países
did not
nenhuma
find any
legislação
country that
que de fato proibisse,
prohibited absolutely the profit
que proibisse por completo
activity,
o
that
exercício da atividade
prohibited completely
educativa
the
que afetava
activity of
obrigatório,
profit
suscitava as
in the
obrigatórias,
educational,
desculpa, muito
in the
rápido para ser
obligatory
gestionado, né? O
education.
estudo considerou
But
sempre
the
a etapa
study
obrigatória,
consider
diz respeito, então, àquilo
always
que é,
the
em
education as
tese,
an
pactuado em cada
obligation
dos estados nacionais
in
como
each
direito
one of the
universal,
states
né?
as
E
a
nenhuma das legislações
universal
proíbe por
right.
completo a atividade
No
lucrativa em
legislation
educação
prohibits
nessa etapa, na etapa de
the
educação
profit
obrigatória
in
ainda que no
education,
caso da
in the
Argentina haja
obligatory
uma
education. In
proibição
Argentina,
mesmo, acordos
nevertheless,
bilaterais com fins de lucro.
it is
As
less
formas por meio das quais
profit
o lucro
allowed.
selecionamos então as duas mais
And we
maior
selected
prevalência.
the
Transferência dos
prevalence
fundos para instituições
of
privadas,
the
direto ou
transference
indiretamente.
of the funds
Diretamente,
to
a condição
private
da
institutions
participação
directly or indirectly
no
from the
programa de
states,
compra
because
por
the
meio de
states transfer
acordos,
resources
enfim, em termos de concessão, coisas do tipo.
with
E
agreements
indiretamente, podemos mencionar como um exemplo
with
quanto a uma
different
transferência
forms,
a
licenses,
instituições
and so on,
sem fins lucrativos, mas
without
elas não são, a elas não é vetado
with profit
prover
objectives. And
prover a educação que assumem
the education
ou
that
são
it assumes
instituições de fato com fins lucrativos.
has to
Renúncia
do
fiscal. O
with
Estado
profit
abre
objectives.
mão de tributos fundamentais para assegurar
Many
o Estado
tributes
garantia dos serviços das políticas
go
sociais
from the
em
social
função
policies to finance the
da
private
atividade privada
education.
no campo da educação e as isenções dos
And
impostos, e isso tem
this is
diferentes
the
formatos
way
em
that
diferentes
it
países.
uses different formats according to the
As
countries.
entrevistas apontaram
Interviews
possibilidades nesses
give us
países,
opportunities
estratégias, né,
in different
para
countries,
que
strategies
haja
to
possibilidades
have the
de
possibility
dificultamento da proibição dos lucros,
of
ainda que a legislação
seeing the difficulties
seja
that
não indutora, mas
exist
permissiva.
in
Por
different
exemplo,
countries
aqui
which
alguns
are more
exemplos, como já foi
permissive,
mencionado, a possibilidade de
as for
organizações sem
instance the
fins lucrativos
possibility
transferirem
to
seus recursos públicos
transfer
recebidos a
these public
instituições
resources
com
to
fins
the private
lucrativos.
sector with profit objectives.
Ao final, a partir
Finally,
dos dados e das
from
recomendações
the
feitas pelos especialistas, a
recommendations
síntese
that
elaborada pela
the
CLAD
specialist people
indica
say for CLADE,
como
we would recommend
recomendações da
finally
incidência política a
the
produção de maior volume de
production
informações
of
e de investigações, a
information and
difusão e
research, the
disseminação dessas
diffusion of
informações em
information through
campanhas, enfim, a
campaigns,
confrontação
so on,
política com vistas à mudança na
the political
legislação, de
confrontation in
maneira a
order to
garantir a
change the
exclusividade da
legislation, in order to
verba
guarantee
pública
the
estatal.
exclusivity of the public resources for the public education.
E
And
o trabalho se encerra, né, com esta observação da CLAD, que os resultados da
with this
investigação
observation,
assinalam um
the
longo caminho a
results
percorrer,
for the
considerando a
research
variedade de
show a
formas
long road
e que
to
através da
go
educação e
through,
há uma
considering the
preocupação
variety of
profunda
the
da
forms
CLAD
of
em
profit
fortalecer a
that
educação
are
pública e
installed in
gratuita
education. We
e
are
os
worried
esforços
about the
públicos
public
sejam, de
resources that
fato,
are not
canalizados
canalized adequately
exclusivamente para as escolas
to
públicas
fortify
e
the
as
public
políticas
and free
de
education,
eficiência
what
política
is added to the
demandada
gravity of the
nesta
lack of
pandemia.
financing that
Encerro para que
guarantees
possamos ter
the
tempo
human
de
right for
discussão e agradeço
education
mais
in
uma vez
many
pela
contexts.
oportunidade.
I thank you for the opportunity.
Agradecida, Teise, por essa
Thank you
apresentação.
for this
Tá? A
presentation,
discussão
your
da
data,
correspondência,
the data of the research, for this so important information. Our discussion in different countries of Latin America are very important. And then at the end, we will do a debate. Please.
Sí, ¿me puedes oír?
Delfina.
Por favor, Delfim.
Delphine, please. Thank you for the presentation. I will speak in Spanish, but I want to thank in Portuguese because I was with the language in my head. I will speak in Spanish. So I will do the change. Yes, I can do it. Thank you for offering me the opportunity to share this space and to give this information so important. The two studies that give so much information for the reflection and for stimuli, the mobilization and the action. Some comments for me. I believe that what I felt in the first presentation of Teresa on the transformation of education and the arrival of new actors in the educational system, we are not talking just to private actors, historical as NGOs or religious schools, but we're talking on enterprises that came to the market and in the transformation of our society and technology and how they serve on the crisis, not only on the crisis, but on the transformation of society. And this has to bring us to the question, which is the role of the private actors, because the international right recognizes a role to the private agent in order to guarantee a space of freedom. And it's so important for the parents and the communities, but it's not what we are seeing in the moment in this time of crisis. And this comes to another question, which is the role of the state in the regulation and to assure education for everybody, not only to regulate the private actors, but also to assure a public education for everybody. And how I think what is important is that the state does not anticipate itself, organizing its system of political system, society, and in this case, education, anticipating also. And I think we are in a time where everything is changing so fast, transforming society and education, but it is as if the state is not following. And what is interesting, Teresa explained so well, to open up to the private actors that are prepared already with all their system of communication and learning and everything, and with a lot of money. So we speak on education and advertising, and they come to the market. That questions also invites to reflect also to the role on education, but the state, and not only the state, questions the role of the civil society and of the citizenship to question that, because the importance of education as a right for education is to guarantee an education that goes to help the development of the people and society. And that is why it is recognized as a human right. And now it's a change in which we pass to the market where we lose essential role of education. And I like a lot how Teresa used the final word that we are in an educational revolution. I think we are in a revolution of society, and we have to push. We do not have to let it go without us. We have to mobilize some more. UNESCO is doing a consultation regarding the future of education, asking everybody, and I think we should call and we should put our voices there. It would be very important because also the way in which we think education for the future cannot be done without the participation of all the actors. And in the moment, what we saw and is underlined is that for the moment, the private actors, the commercial enterprises are giving the new educational policy, and this cannot be because it's education for all the society, and the new policies must be developed with the participation of everybody. And some points for the regarding the presentation of this analysis and research that you have done on legislation on profit. It helps a lot to reflect and to think what we can do in the future. What I want to share is that it's not to have a law and to regulate, because there are some laws, but they favor the private actors, but are not developed and they allow to be done. So it's not just to speak about legislation. And I am a lawyer and my work is around the legislative framework. But what I see in my work is the right for education, the human rights. And this supra law is not the law of a paper from the parliament, but it's a higher law that means that we don't know in which world we want to be and what kind of society we want to reach. It's always important to go back to this basis, to the principle of the human rights, but not only the human right in the treaties, but the essential. What is education? Why is so important, and why we have to protect education, and why we have to protect also the law that goes together with the essence of education. And there are many things to reflect of the development of this law, the curriculum, technology, and how we will regulate all that. And it's a thing of society, it's not a thing of just law and regulation, because the law means show a reflection and a policy of a reflection around the world. So I think it's very interesting all this. Thank you so much. Are questions that have created, that help to reflect more, and there is urgency to mobilize according to these things. Thank you so much to be able to share some reflections regarding your work. It's a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Obrigada, Delfine.
Thank you, Delphine. We have a comment here in the chat. Rocha. Thank you for sharing the study for the present state of the public policies, and show us the challenges and to the instruments for the visualization and social mobility. This is the comment. And also our presentation. And how can we use these instruments to make incidents in this debate? 1 or 2 minutes for comments of Teresa, please. Please, because we have very, very little time.
Podemos inverter agora a Teise e depois Teresa.
Teise, please.
Claro.
And then Teresa.
Obrigada. Obrigada, Teresa, pela apresentação do estudo. Acho que coloca grandes
Thank you,
questões.
Teresa, for the presentation of the study that Delphine, for the things that you put in the table. I think that
ouvindo a fala da Teresa, sobre a
speaking of
expansão do
Teresa
mercado no contexto da pandemia
and
e
what has
pensando
happened in
quão
the context
a
of
regulamentação
pandemia and
na região da América
how the
Latina e Caribe é permissiva ao
regularization
lucro,
in
né?
Latin
Como
America
esse território
and
se tornou
Arabia allows the
não um
profit in
obstáculo,
this
não um
very
dificultador a que o mercado se expandisse, mas
territory,
pelo mais um
how
território fértil,
this is a
né? Da
fertile
redução
territory
extrema
for the
à
profit.
não temos proibição,
We are
mas
not
a
with
permissão,
prohibition, but
então a
with permission,
permissividade mostra que a
with a
realidade que a
permission
América
that
Latina e
tells us
Caribe
that
aqui
Latin
América Latina e
America
Caribe
and
se
the
constituem para o desenvolvimento do
Caribbean
mercado educacional, né?
um,
Ou para a transformação da
are for
educação
the
de direito
transformation
humano,
of
como destaca
education.
bastante bem, de forma muito importante, Delfine, como mercado. Em relação às
And
observações de Delfine, eu quero dizer que concordo plenamente.
Delfina,
Eu sei absolutamente que no contexto de uma sociedade
in
capitalista,
the context
não
of
se
a
vai
capitalist
constituir um marco
society, it's not
regulatório
possible
capaz
to
de assegurar
build
plenamente
a,
o direito humano à educação, porque
a human right
estruturalmente
for
vivemos uma
education because
desigualdade. Todavia, eu
structurally
entendo que uma das frentes de
we have
disputas
to
fundamentais
see if
e que
one of the fronts of the dispute fundamental
tensiona o capital
is
é
the
disputar
tensions
pelo
of the
direito do marco
capital
legal. Isso nos
and
polariza. E entendo que mais do
in
que criar leis é
more
preciso,
than
e é
to
tal como a CLARE
create
recomenda ao final,
nets. I
do
recommend at
trabalho,
the end to
temos uma
Clare
mobilização permanente
a
da sociedade
permanent
civil em
mobilization of the
torno
civil
da
society
expansão né,
for the
das utopias que
expansion
nos
of the
impedem de caminhar,
utopias
né? A nossa luta permanente
that
para
needs to be
conseguirmos
there
desenvolver uma
to
educação
build an
mais justa, de
education with
qualidade,
more
socialmente
justice
referenciada, mas para
and
um
more
mundo
quality and
justo,
for a new
né?
world that
E que
would be just,
possibilite de fato
that
pleno
would made
desenvolvimento da nação
possible
humana, como diz a Constituição
the
brasileira, né?
full
O
development of
princípio
each
constitucional,
human
pleno
being.
desenvolvimento da personalidade humana,
The
qualificação para
constitutional
exercício do
principle,
trabalho e
basic
qualificação para se desenvolver
development for
numa sociedade
everyone.
desigual,
Society
estruturada
like
pela
the one we
desigualdade, em
have,
que o mercado assume a
structuring the
responsabilidade educativa, é
inequalities in the
inviável.
profit,
Mas a nossa
it's
luta é uma luta
unviable.
permanente. Eu
It's not
encerro agradecendo
possible.
mais uma vez e
I
convidando a todos a
thank
ler o
you,
conjunto de
everybody, and
escritos
I
artigos
invite
recebi,
you
fiquei na madrugada lendo,
to
porque
be
realmente é
together
uma
in
grande
these
contribuição
studies
para
and
cada uma das
contribute
lutas que
for each
travamos em
one
nossos
of the
diferentes
ones that
espaços.
work in these
Graças.
different spaces. Thank you.
Obrigada. Teresa?
Thank you,
Un
Teresa.
placer
It's a
participar de
pleasure
este
to
bloque
participate
con
in this table.
Denise, Delfine.
Delphine,
Realmente muy de acuerdo con lo que
I agree
dice, pero
absolutely
además
on
creo
what
que
you
como
say, and
sociedad
I
civil
think
tenemos
that
que
as a
estar
civil
alertas
society we
a
have to
que
be
las
alert
demandas
that
que
the
se hacen ante
demands
los
that are
estados
done in
sean
front of the
respondidas
states would not
mediante,
be
en
responded
este contexto,
in this
mediante la empresa
context
privada, ¿no?
to the
Nosotros
private
en el estudio que hemos
enterprise.
hecho hemos
In the
también
study we have
realizado
done,
entrevistas
we have done some
también les
interviews to
agradecemos por su
experts
tiempo
to
y compartir su
we thank
sabiduría con nosotros.
their,
Y ahí, por
their
ejemplo, nos
wisdom
preguntaban
that
cómo
have
se había
shared with
hecho en
us,
algunos de los
and they
países
told us
una
how it
marcha, un
has
paro,
been
una
done
demanda por
in
mayor
each
accesibilidad
country,
y la
some
respuesta del Estado
manifestations
fue
and
lograr
march and response
mayores
of
acuerdos
the
con las
state
telefónicas, ¿no?
that
Claramente,
acquire more
tenemos
agreements
que
with the
tener el eje de que nuestra demanda
multinational
es por
telephone
un Estado
companies.
con respuesta
We
soberana,
don't have
¿no? Por una
to
educación
forget that
privada, de
our
formación
fight is
decente.
for
Y acá estoy
an
leyendo los
education,
comentarios del chat también,
free,
que la
public, and
telefónica pues
quality
ten por cuenta lo que
education.
sucede
And here I am
en
reading
Perú, ¿no?
the
Con los
comments in the chat.
estudiantes de
So what
escuelas
happens in
privadas
Peru with the
que tienen que
students
migrar a la
of
pública.
private schools
Eso
have
también
to
está en el
migrate to
estudio,
the
pero
public?
además
This is
mostrando
also in the
cómo el
study,
Estado
but
se hace
showing
cargo
how
de
the
instalar estas
states
inversiones
in
privadas
in
en
its hands
estas
how to
escuelas privadas
take these
mediante
private
subsidios que
schools
los mismos estados
with
pagan para pensiones
subsidies
o
and
bien para ciertas
pensions and offering
necesidades.
certain
Entonces tenemos una tarea
facilities.
muy difícil
So we have
por
a
delante
very
y la
difficult
tarea
task
es no
in front
dejarnos
of us,
también
and the
como
task is
tragar por este gran
to leave us
círculo
stuck
privatizador
by
que
this big
estamos viviendo de una
privatization
manera tan
circle that
fuerte.
we are living in a so strong
Gracias,
way in this
Teresa.
context. Thank you,
Muito
Teresa.
importante também o que traz. Eu gostaria
Very
de
important
encerrar
that
esta mesa
Thais
trazendo em um minuto uma
wants to
questão que me
integrate
veio à mente
this
muitas vezes
table,
nesse debate
bringing
desse segundo
something to this
dialogar nessas nossas
in
discussões
this
de hoje.
question, in this
Por exemplo, aqui
discussions
no Brasil,
today
nós
in Brazil,
estamos
for
cada
instance,
vez mais permissivos
we are
e
each
uma
time
PEC
more
precisa buscar
permissive.
a corda da
We need to
regulamentação, né, da legislação,
strengthen the
em
cord of
termos da
regulation
permissividade desse uso,
without a
e é também
permissivity,
uma ação que vem sendo
and
sendo
it's an
feita pelos
action that
promotores,
will
né,
let us
desse
win
tipo, né, do capital
by the
social. O
promotions
Brasil,
in
já na
Brazil.
tentativa de
The
regulamentação da educação
intention of
domiciliar,
regulation,
que é
that
um
is
dos
the home
processos da
education,
privatização, porque a
which is one of
escola
the
passa a ser
big
dentro da
issues
casa,
of
sem
privatization, because the
relações
school is
comunitárias
inside
dentro
the
de uma
house
escola pública.
without
E participei de
communitary
uma audiência na semana
relationship.
passada sobre
So I
educação domiciliar na
participated
Comissão de Educação
of a
do
team
Congresso Nacional,
yesterday,
em que
last week,
participou também o
regarding this
presidente da
issue,
Associação
where
Nacional
the
de
National
Educação Domiciliar
Association of
e na fala do
Home
presidente ele falou
Education, the
explicitamente
president
que a
spoke
educação domiciliar
that
é um
the
grande
home
mercado a ser
education is a
explorado
big
no Brasil.
market to be
Então,
explored in
esses
Brazil.
termos
So
foram colocados. Então,
these
é
were the
nada
themes that were
exclusivo
placed
e a
there. So
disputa na
the
legislação sempre é
dispute
muito presente dos dois lados. Temos
in
que
relation
reforçar
to
com
this, we have to
perspectividade.
reinforce
Então, queria
this work.
agradecer
So I want to
os
thank
estudos, as informações
all of
todas
you with the
que
information that were
voltados
very
sobre toda a
useful
nossa América
here in
Latina, para que
Brazil as
possamos
well as in
trabalhar
all our
ainda
Latin
mais
America, where
nesse
we
fim
can
dos
work
processos de
in this
privatização
process of
e colocar os
privatization
atores da
and
comunidade
bring the
educacional
actors
nessa agenda
in
com
this
suas vozes, né?
agenda with
Como
their
falou no
voices,
slogan da Semana de
as
Ação Mundial,
we spoke
1 milhão de vozes para a educação.
week of
Então, trazemos
World Week
aqui,
of Education,
continuaremos
a
trazendo as
billion
vozes dos
voices for
estudantes,
education.
educadores, das
We are
educadoras
bringing them
sobre
here
a escola pública
in order to
e o direito
defend the
desse
public
direito à
school,
educação, que é
the
o que
public, the
nós
right
estamos
for
aqui presentes
education.
hoje. Então,
That
também
has
gostaria de
all
agradecer a
of us
CLAD pelo
today
convite
here.
de estar aqui nessa
I
negociação, que é
want
um
to
momento
thank
de muito
Claudia
próximo
for this
aprendizado. Tenho certeza que para
invitation,
todas
which
as
was
pessoas que nos
very
assistiram.
beautiful and very
Obrigada.
useful. Thank you so much.
Muy bien. Muchísimas
Okay,
gracias.
thank you
Gracias,
so
Andrea,
much. Thank you, Andresa,
Teresa,
Teresa,
una
Teresa.
gran mesa de mujeres
A
del
big
PRI en
table of
especial.
women, Delphine,
Y a
Maria,
Grant por
and
acompañarnos
Grant
también
for
en el evento, y a
accompanying
todos
us
los
in
amigos
this
y amigas
event,
que han estado
and all
aquí.
the friends that have here today.
Solamente quiero
I
dejarles
just
un
want
desafío. Yo
to
creo que
give you
el
a
gran
challenge,
esfuerzo
leave
que
you a
hacemos por
challenge. This
levantar
big effort that
información,
we do to
datos,
research, have data, information,
análisis,
reflection,
publicaciones,
analysis,
tiene que
publication,
ser
has
complementado
to
con un
be
segundo esfuerzo
complemented
en
with a
territorio
second effort
de
in the
llevar los
territory
contenidos
to
de
bring
manera
the
más
contents
sencilla
in
a
an
nuestra gente.
easier way to
Porque
our
siento
people.
que
Because I
hay
feel
una tarea
that there
que
is
tenemos que enfrentar
task
con mucha
that we have
fuerza, y
to
es, yo la
handle
llamo,
with a lot of force,
de construir
that
el
is
sentido común, las narrativas
deconstruct
del
the
silencio,
common sense, the
porque en el
narratives of
sentido
the
común de
common
nuestra
sense, because in
población
the
se
common
fomentar
sense
la
of our
valorización de lo
populations
privado,
is the
de la educación
valorization of the
privada, del
private,
lucro,
private
del
education,
éxito,
of
de la
profit, of
ganancia,
success,
de etcétera,
of
etcétera, etcétera.
etc.,
Y
etc.
nosotros,
And we
nosotros los
need
educadores y
that
educadoras
we are
tenemos esa
education,
tarea por hacer.
we are from
Yo creo que
educational
todo
have a
este
task.
esfuerzo enorme
All
que
this
hacemos en
effort, enormous
investigación,
effort of research,
necesita también
publications,
un
need also
seguimiento
the
cercano
follow-up
a la gente más
and
sencilla
given
y
to the
ayudar
people, the most
a
simple people, help them
no tragarse,
not
como dice
to
Teresa,
swallow, as
las
Teresa
porquerías que dicen,
said, what they say to us,
a alimentar el pensamiento
to
crítico,
feed
porque
the
eso
critical thought,
ayuda a la movilización
because
y
that
ayuda
helps
a
mobilization and
ayuda a
helps
todos.
our
Así
people and
que,
helps
bueno,
all of us.
nos
So
despedimos.
nothing else.
Muchas gracias a
I say
todas y todos
bye-bye
por
to
estar acá.
everybody. Thank
Ha
you
sido un
so much to
momento
everybody to be
muy,
here.
muy
It has been a
especial.
wonderful
Un abrazo
encounter.
para todos y
I
todas.
thank you so much for
Usen las
everybody and
publicaciones a
use the
vuestro favor.
communications, please.
Úsenlas. Un
Use
abrazo
these
muy grande.
publications, please. A big hug to all.